Right now, the global regime known as the world government is in the most precarious position it has ever been in over the course of its 800-year-long history. From the recent abolishment of the long-standing 7 Warlord system, spreading their forces thin in an attempt to apprehend their former lapdogs, to the now historic invasion of the Holy Land Mary Joa by way of a newly dubbed Flame Emperor Sabo-led revolutionary army, and even an 8-kingdom resistance, things appear to be far worse than ever for the world power. And that is all without even mentioning the shift of standing Yonkos, establishment of the Navy Hunting Cross Guild, or second coming of Joy Boy. However, we would certainly be remiss to underestimate such a long-standing force, especially considering the extreme lengths they have proven themselves to go to in pursuit of their so-called absolute justice. And on account of chapter 1059 of One Piece, we received an all-too-chilling reminder of this fact: war against warlords. With the dissolution of the 7 Warlord system, one of the 3 great powers, a power vacuum subsequently followed. And it was arguably on account of this missing deterrent that things began to fall apart as badly as they did. And although the world government probably didn't anticipate things going this poorly, at the very least, they knew an appropriate replacement was necessary. Enter the Special Science Group, SSG for short. This scientific unit was tasked with replacing the 7 Warlord system, and it would appear as though they have taken that task quite literally. Leading the SSG is the foremost brilliant mind in the entirety of the One Piece world, the yet to be properly unveiled Dr. Vegapunk. And frankly, the good doctor is yet again outdone himself, which, mind you, is a very difficult thing to do, considering that in regards to his scientific and technological advancements, the man is heralded to be over 500 years ahead of his contemporaries. He is a genius among geniuses, whose intellect makes some of the most prolific minds in the world look incompetent. A reality very clearly proven over the course of his involvement in the now disbanded scientific research team known as MADS. Disregarding Vegapunk, this group was made up of the foremost experts in their respective scientific fields. Caesar the Clown for biological and chemical experimentation, Judge Vinsmoke for genetic experimentation, and finally, Queen for cybernetic experimentation. Again, Vegapunk is peerless in all things scientific. Dr. Vegapunk created an artificial devil fruit that was consumed by Momonosuke at a later point, which provided him with draconic powers akin to those of the former Yonko and most wanted man alive, Kaido. Caesar's attempt at creating artificial devil fruits resulted in what are known as smile fruits, which possess an alarming success rate of only 10%. Queen's technological weaponry and augmentation, albeit formidable during the raid on Onigashima, severely pales in comparison to the likes of Dr. Vegapunk's Pacifista project. Or hell, even just the laser system he had devised in his youth, which Frankie replicated. But now, finally, although it was previously debatable if Vegapunk was indeed superior to Judge in regards to the genetic modification of living organisms and cloning, on account of his 5 enhanced children and clone army, the answer is now all too clear. Look no further than to the recently unveiled entities known as a Seraphim. These pint-sized enforcers are truly the embodiment of Vegapunk's scientific superiority. Being the latest and greatest iteration of Pacifista, these things are presumably superior to the previous models in all feasible metrics, beyond perhaps the devil fruit abilities of PX0. Furthermore, they appear to be child clones of former warlords of the sea. Thus far, we have seen the likes of a Boa Hancock Seraphim and a Dracul Mihawk Seraphim. And as if all that wasn't enough, these things also boast all the notable features of the all but extinct Lunarian race. And with all that, there is definitely a whole lot to be unpacked here. But before we better our understanding of these creatures, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications on and drop a like on the video for some plot armor today. What are Seraphim? Alright, so let's tackle everything we know about these things piece by piece. First and foremost, we have their name, Seraphim. Now, for those unfamiliar, a Seraphim is a celestial being that originates from ancient Judaism. The notion of them being celestial makes them pretty fitting enforcers of the celestial dragons. In Christian angelology, they are the highest ranked angels. This may serve to imply that the Seraphim are indeed the final iteration of the Pacifista line. The Seraphim are said to be God's agents of purification, the cleansers of sin. This is certainly reflective of the sentiment presently among the 5 elders, aka the outward leaders of the celestial dragons who consider themselves to be gods. Their belief, as of chapter 908, being that, quote, the world equilibrium cannot be maintained forever. The time has come for a great cleansing. The word Seraphim translates to the fiery ones, originating from the Hebrew root word saraf, which means to burn. This again points to a burning of what is, but also stands to represent the halo-like flames on their backs that they owe to their Lunarian traits. I also quite like the symbolism associated with their laser technology, reminiscent of Kizaru's light-based Logia powers. It is said in the Christian faith that God is light, therefore making the Seraphim in One Piece the bringers of light, although in Latin, Lightbringer is Lucifer. Dead gods. Now back onto the point of Lunarian traits, where did they get those? Well, the Lunarian race didn't go extinct with the exception of King thanks to natural causes. The world government's forces are almost exclusively human. But that's not to say that they fail to acknowledge the capabilities of the world's other races. Far from it. The exception to the rule when it comes to marine enlistment is that of the Giants, on account of the undeniable military might they provide. Despite very clearly being physically inferior to most other humanoids, by way of overwhelming numbers and union, has limited the influence of virtually all others, effectively forcing them to remain isolated lest they be subjugated, eliminated, or worse, as is clearly the case with the Lunarians. There are a few things worth noting about the Lunarians that likely make them high priority targets for the world government. To begin with, we have their physiology. Just like how the Giants are coveted for their strength, so too are the Lunarians. They thrive in any and all natural environments, can fly, manipulate fire they themselves create, are ridiculously durable, and may exchange said durability for extreme speed at their behest. All of which were things that made Zoro's battle against King an incredibly arduous one. They have all the makings of a perfect military race, but perhaps even more threatening were the legends surrounding them. The Lunarians were once revered as a tribe of gods, and certainly for the celestial dragons, figures that believe themselves to be the only true gods, such covenants could not persist. Furthermore, according to Whitebeard, long before the Holy Land Mary Joa sat atop the Red Line, the Lunarian homeland, a land of gods, was in its place. And truly, as the only winged humanoids capable of flight, a sufficient Lunarian force would have certainly presented an issue for the otherwise incredibly hard to reach home of the celestial dragons. All this is to say that from the perspective of the world government, the Lunarian threat needed to be dealt with. And best believe that they did not take this threat lightly at all. Don't believe me? Well, how about the fact that for just a tip-off as to the whereabouts of any Lunarian, a person would be rewarded with a whopping 100 million berries. That is the price of most devil fruits, and we are only talking about a tip-off here. Couple that with the fact that the construction of even just a single original model Pacifista is estimated to be about the same price as a Marine-issued battleship. And with that, it is made all too clear that the cost of making a Seraphim is no doubt astronomical. Now, as for how Vegapunk went about implementing such incredible Lunarian traits into the Seraphim, we may look no further than to his in-depth understanding and manipulation of what is known as the Lineage Factor. The process is likely similar to his extraction of Kaido's Lineage Factor during his attempts at creating an artificial devil fruit. And as a reminder, the Lineage Factor is essentially like DNA in the One Piece world. However, as magnificent as that creation eventually proved itself to be in the possession of Momonosuke, regardless, it was deemed by its creator, Dr. Vegapunk, to be a failure. Now, don't get me wrong here. Certainly, it could be presumed that because that was a while ago, Vegapunk has improved on his exploitation of the Lineage Factor and, as such, has perfected the practice to the point of now doing so in the case of Lunarian traits present within the Seraphim. After all, the Doctor was responsible for the creation of fully functional artificial life in the form of the mythical creatures known as dragons. But although I certainly know better than to doubt the scientific capabilities of Dr. Vegapunk, I believe we should be looking at this a bit differently. Considering how astute Vegapunk has proven himself to be as a man responsible for so thoroughly expanding upon the world's understanding of devil fruits, there is no reason to believe that the results yielded by Momonosuke's consumption of the fruit would differ from Vegapunk's deductions. And as such, we must subsequently alter our assumed criteria for success and redefine what it means to be a failure in this context. On paper, Momonosuke's devil fruit abilities, coloration aside, look to be a perfect replication of Kaido's, and therein lies the problem. Rather than transforming into a dragon, Momonosuke is made to transform into a dragon form of Kaido. Let me explain. A true devil fruit, especially a Zoan type, is adaptive to its user. A simple example of this would be Chopper's Hito Hito no Mi, which allows him to make use of human traits and transformations. If consumed by someone else, especially an actual human, the results will be very different. They wouldn't have things such as guard point or horn point, for instance. And if this is indeed the reason that Vegapunk considers artificial devil fruit to be a failure, well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, think about it. Momonosuke really struggled with his devil fruit abilities. You could argue that he was a child and had a whole lot going on at the time. I mean, just look at how long it took Luffy to gain any semblance of control over his devil fruit abilities. But listen, this is a Zoan type we're talking about here. The easiest grab and go kind of devil fruit ability there is. Well, maybe not grab and go exactly, as CP9's Kaku made abundantly clear, but for the most part, they are able to be used to great effect fairly quickly. And sure, Luffy's fruit has indeed been revealed to be in actuality also a Zoan type, but come on now, it is literally known to be the most ridiculous power in the world. No, I'd argue that Momonosuke's real issue was rooted in his many differences from Kaido. And although he has now come to a far more reputable level of comparison, it is quite likely that Momonosuke's devil fruit abilities will never be able to exceed the balance to which Kaido presented. Essentially, his growth is both linear and limited. Now, bringing all this back to the Seraphim, such a failure is largely subjective. The capabilities of Kaido are astounding and far exceed those of most others. So suffice to say, even with such imposing limitations, said limitations are so extravagant and high that a duplicate is still pretty exceptional. And so, in regards to the use of the Lunarian Lineage Factor, perhaps Vegapunk merely shifted his intentions. Rather than desiring mutability and change, he instead coveted consistency and accuracy. A perfect replication of Lunarian traits. Yet even still, despite an intention for racial traits to be static, it is quite possible he desired an entirely different outcome in certain other areas. Clones that fly. As stated previously, the Seraphim that we have seen thus far have been clones of the former Warlords of the Sea, Boa Hancock, and Dracula Mihawk. But for as incredible as this may be, it is admittedly nothing new. The Pacifista program, since its inception, has seen the replication of a former warlord, the ex-king and revolutionary Bartholomew Kuma. Now, cruelty aside, why do this? Why replicate Kuma specifically? Well, he's physically proven. The guy looks like a walking tank, and even without his overpowered devil fruit in mind, is very powerful. And maybe you're now wondering why, if he is so proven, would Vegapunk seek to deviate from such a proven formula? Well, outside of Buggy, all the former warlords are proven. Maybe not so much in regards to stature as Kuma, but certainly in other respects. I mean, the Seraphim of Mihawk is a perfect reflection of this. Like his genetic father, the kid wields a sword and does so to great effect, going as far as to be the very first person we have seen force Blackbeard to use armament haki. Furthermore, prior to this attack, with a single sword slash, the kid managed to cleave the massive mountain on Amazon Lily. Guys, this is a feat on par with a Dressrosa level Zoro, so yeah, maybe a clone of the world's greatest swordsman also makes sense. But what about Boa Hancock's Seraphim? Why make a clone of her? Or hell, any of the devil fruit wielding former warlords? The answer is simple, but no less astounding. What, as far as Kaido is concerned, is the great equalizer of the sea: haki. The warlords, again with the exception of Buggy, make up some of the world's greatest masters of haki. Now, if the Seraphim are indeed capable of haki use, that may lead us to an even greater revelation. Remember, haki is the use of one's own spiritual power, which is to say that by using haki, the Seraphim would therefore be in possession of souls. And now that we mention it, there's also another aspect in which the Seraphim differ from the Pacifistas that came before them. When the Mihawk Seraphim clashes with Blackbeard, his emotions are on full display as he grits his teeth in pursuit of his new target. Meanwhile, in the midst of the carnage, the Boa Hancock Seraphim has a smile on her face. The previous PX models, although sometimes eliciting facial expressions, typically only ever did so in the face of direct harm. As made evident by Kobe's commands, the Seraphim seem to be just as beholden to orders as their predecessors, but even still, they are capable of far more complex emotions. Vegapunk's little angels. Now, our final aspect of inquiry is especially bizarre. The Seraphim are children. Why would Vegapunk do this? Sure, angels are often depicted as babies and such on account of their purity, but my question is more targeted than that. Why would Vegapunk do this? I ask the question because doing such a thing, at least at first glance, very much conflicts with other key pieces of information we have on the man. But then again, some might argue that the same may be said for all that we know about the guy. Dr. Vegapunk was born in the future country, Baltimore. As far as we know, he is not literally from the future, but rather his homeland is so technologically advanced that it earns such a name. And even in such an advanced location, even in his youth, Vegapunk proved to be a cut above the rest and created many things that aided in the lives of his people. Yet, despite this generosity, Vegapunk eventually found himself in the company of some rather unsavory researchers during his time at MADS. Yet even still, Vegapunk remained far more morally sound than his peers, even going as far as to condemn the gas weapon of Caesar in fear of it claiming innocent lives, as well as refusing to include child test subjects during his attempts at gigantification. And so at this point, it's hard to blame anyone for believing that Vegapunk has shifted to being a more callous and relentless man on account of now working with the world government, since his prior sentiments don't seem to align with his present dabblings. But even despite all this, I don't actually believe this to be the case. In fact, I think it is far more likely that the Doctor does, and always has, meant well. I mean, just look at any one of Dr. Vegapunk's many achievements. Sea Prism Stone, although damning in many instances over the course of the series, acts as a proper means of detainment and regulation in the face of incredibly dangerous Devil Fruit abilities. It has allowed ships to go across the calm belt without the fear of being attacked by Sea Kings. The Pacifista are lethal weapons that began with the cruel modification of a human being. There is no way around that. Yet even still, the Pacifista capture and or defeat wanted criminals with such efficiency that there is, by extension, a lessened likelihood of marine and or civilian lives being claimed. Vegapunk even went as far as to honor Kuma's final wish of being made to protect the Straw Hat ship until their return. Vegapunk, from all that we know about him, strikes me as a man of peace, but one that is pragmatic enough to recognize that peace comes at a cost. And perhaps he is kept at a distance from the true sum of his efforts. But either way, he remains superior to his contemporaries in all aspects, even on the scale of the calamities he has wrought. And it is in the understanding of this that we may paint a better picture of what was likely Oda's inspiration for the creation of this character. And it's honestly a pretty easy inspiration at that, considering the name of the man he is likely based on is, at this point, at least in the West, all but synonymous with the word genius. I am of course referring to Albert Einstein. The late theoretical physicist is one of the most well-known scientists of all time, best known for his development of the theory of relativity, the arguably just as famous E=mc² equation. However, Einstein is worse known for his instrumental involvement in the series of events that would ultimately lead to the development of atomic bombs, the likes of which were horrifically dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan during World War II. And as such, similarly to Vegapunk, Einstein, while applauded by many for his scientific expertise, is reviled by others. For instance, being a Japanese creation, the Mega Man franchise's premier antagonist happens to be a mad scientist by the name of Dr. Albert W. Wiley, a character who even resembles Einstein. Yet in actuality, as is probably the case with Dr. Vegapunk, Einstein was hardly such a monster. I say this because, contrary to popular belief, Einstein did not directly participate in the creation of the atomic bomb at all. You see, following the historic splitting of the uranium bomb in 1938 by scientists in Berlin, although there were certain issues to be worked out before it could be made into a bomb, it was only a matter of time before such a breakthrough would be weaponized to devastating effect. And as such, in fear that the Germans might succeed in doing so, Einstein presented his concerns to President Franklin Roosevelt by way of letter. And so, in heeding Einstein's words, it was thanks to this letter that the Manhattan Project commenced. Despite no further involvement, Einstein would claim this to be his life's greatest mistake. However, he also believed that if there was any justification for his actions, it would be that the Germans would make them. And now I'm really hoping you're picking up on all the connections to be found here. If not, don't worry, because Plot Armor has you covered. In the context of One Piece, the Germans would be the similarly named Germa 66, a force that was formerly known in the world of One Piece to be synonymous with evil. And like in Western media, there was a whole lot of propaganda being pushed against them during past broadcasts. Cloning is the One Piece world's version of the atomic bomb. Judge and Vegapunk uncover the secrets of the Lineage Factor together, and Judge later went on to clone himself a massive army and cybernetically augmented his children. Like the case of Einstein, Vegapunk likely recognized the threat Germa would one day pose along this track progression, and believed that for the greater good, such a thing should be wielded by the world government instead. Oh, and as if these similarities weren't prevalent enough, Einstein was born German, but renounced his citizenship in favor of an American one, which is pretty similar to Vegapunk leaving the company of Judge and the other MADS members in favor of the world government's acceptance. In regards to Vegapunk's contradicting use of children in his experiments, despite his reluctance, the results have proven themselves. But there is also the fact that the children from Punk Hazard that Caesar experimented on were delivered to his doorstep by Tashigi and Smoker. Although imperfect and unsavory, progress has been made, and scientific proof is unlikely to be denied by such a man. Like with artificial devil fruits, Vegapunk can do everything his contemporaries can, but even better. And so, he has. Aside from fellow pacifistas, the Vinsmoke siblings are the closest comparison to the Seraphim project, as they too began as augmented children. However, perhaps unlike the Vinsmoke kids, who emerged emotionally inept and powerful, or in the case of Sanji, emotionally capable with powers that only began to properly manifest in adulthood, the Seraphim appear to be both incredibly powerful from the outset and emotionally advanced. Now, just to throw it in there since it kinda came up, the darkest reality would be one in which the children recovered from Punk Hazard were harvested as a base for the Seraphim. It would be exceedingly cruel, but this is One Piece after all. To be transparent, the detail that inspired me to even provide this concept was the final declaration of the children during their farewells to the Straw Hats. A declaration that they too would one day become pirates. And this is despite overt marine condemnation. And listen, if this is true, then maybe by becoming clones of pirates, they have fulfilled that promise. Dark stuff. Anyways, Vegapunk may have failed to apply gigantification to adults, while Caesar proved to yield better results with children, but I'm not of the impression that the Seraphim project would be an outright failure if they weren't children. After all, every pacifista before them were grown men. Rather, I believe this is where that mutability and development aspect we touched upon earlier come into play. It's simple. Children are capable of growth. The Seraphim may very well go on to rapidly mature into adulthood, not only rivaling their genetic precursors, but exceeding them. Imagine if Dracula Mihawk was a Lunarian instead of a human. How much more powerful would he be? Well, that's nothing compared to a Seraphim, which also boasts pacifista technology. And this isn't just some terrifying prospect. This is reality. We have two pieces of evidence which point to the Seraphim still being imperfect. Firstly, there is the fact that along with the declaration to send the Seraphim onto the front lines, there was also a command to record them. This likely means that this is a field test of sorts. Secondly, despite being as powerful as he is already, the Mihawk Seraphim is honestly rather unlike the world's greatest swordsman. And I am not talking at all in terms of skill, but rather his demeanor. The kid is angry and aggressive. In every instance, he appears to be emotionally charged. And whereas in the case of swordsmen like Zoro, this sort of thing is par for the course, it is very unlike the dead calm master of swordsmanship he is based off of. Whether this is something he will grow to change or not is honestly irrelevant. Whatever the case may be, despite being somewhat of a genetic replicant of Mihawk, his spirit, or his soul, is different. So maybe, even if the Seraphim are incapable of using Haki, which they honestly may not need at all, perhaps as masters of Haki, the former warlords of the sea serve as ideal candidates because of the strength and refinement of their souls. Already, the SSG have proven themselves to be a terrifying force to be reckoned with. In some ways, even more so than the now collapsed warlord system on account of their unified goals and organization. As a sucker for all things robot and fiction, I for one cannot wait to see what the Seraphim are truly capable of. And hey, if there's anything you would like to add to the discussion, like what the other Seraphim might be like, such as a Jinbei one, please do so in the comments down below. As always, I am Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.